We carry Mind Flayer parasites.
What?
Within days, we will be Geich, Mind Flayers.
Coming up with new video ideas is probably the hardest aspect to doing a new post. Speaking for myself, the writing, editing, drawing, animating kind of just falls in line to whatever the topic of choice ends up being. And like most people, I'm sure we rarely ever stick to one medium at a time. And sometimes it's a TV show that really sucks us in for weeks on end, or a movie that really sticks with us a good while, and you just can't do anything else but annoy your friends talking about it. Or like I'm sure you've already seen from the title of the video, there's a little video game that comes along to suck us down the rabbit hole of debauchery, where you're almost half willing to quit your job and dedicate every waking hour delving into side quests and every single exploration encounter that you can find. There's not too many games in my experience that have latched me with their talons in that way. There have definitely been many upticks in the past year. I want to say since 2021-ish, my big obsession was falling into the From Software game lineup. Those games are masterpieces in their own right, but say this sincerely that I have not had a game grip me in its clutches like this since the dark years of middle school into high school, where my grades and social life basically tanked because of my obsession with Skyrim. And that was back in 2012, give or take. Like, Skyrim was my saving grace to a lot of bad shit that was going on at the time for me personally. And now we come to this Baldur's Gate. Okay, so quick pro quo. This is not a review. I had maybe 50 hours in the game, not even into Act 2 of the story yet, and I've spent that much time in just the first act of the game, not even finishing it. Let that sink in. So most games on release, in general, I think a healthy average for a worthwhile experience is somewhere between 30 hours minimum and upwards to 70 hours depending on its style, replayability, and endgame content. Live service games excluded, that's just a different class on its own, since there's really no end to the layout of games like Overwatch, Destiny, or Fortnite. But Baldur's Gate 3 is a mostly single-player action-adventure CRPG, which that term CRPG is something I didn't even know existed. If you're more of a casual gamer, which I think I lean more towards that end of the gaming spectrum, maybe slightly above average casual gamer at best. But games like God of War, the originals, Uncharted, or the Batman Arkham games are typically the more general lineup of titles that I lean towards. It takes a lot of time for me to take a chance on anything like the FromSoft games, or something with just a totally new playstyle or learning curve, which are more present in things like indie titles, or more specifically, something that's turn-based. So that's the main theme for this video, how and why this game managed to replicate an experience that I have not felt since I was like 13, give or take, and some. But that's going to require a hefty amount of backstory on my end, because I really want to demonstrate the arc of where I was before starting Baldur's Gate to now. And I also want to maybe encourage some of you who feel left out in the crowd about the hype of this game, and perhaps even turn around into giving this a shot for yourself, best case scenario. So let's go back several months ago, I want to say September, maybe October, somewhere around there. BG3 had already been out for a month, maybe 2 at this point. I'd been casually keeping up with the game, but not really. But my only interest to it, honestly, was as to why the hell is this complicated and generically fantasy-looking turn-based game was getting so much attention. Like, it was actually annoying me. I know, God, I hate it. I'm being honest, alright? Baldur's Gate 3 is so amazing, this is an absolute must-buy, you're missing out, rada. And every time I saw footage, it looked just like that. I'm someone who's more of a sci-fi guy, so yeah, biased. Like, I have a whole closet dedicated to mostly nothing but Star Wars merchandise and toys. Yeah, I'm one of those people. But this game just absolutely baffled me, because it looked nothing like a title that should be garnering that much attention, even though it's incredibly ignorant of me to assume that. Be patient, this was me back then, but this game has done a total 180 on me. I am saved, Holy Mother, Larian Studios, be blessed. Honest to God, those were my genuine impressions. Now, my turn from that kind of thinking was already starting to take form when I began my FromSoft crusade. Those are games that are very in-depth and customizable when it comes to class building and exploration. At the time, I thought those were the cream of the crop when it came to me becoming fully immersed in a world of that caliber. I was keeping journals of different build ideas and allocating stat points into what I thought would be the most optimal layout of whatever theme I was trying to go for with my character. And that was something that I had never done before, years prior, but because of those games' story, world, and awesome, rewarding, but punishing difficulty curve, it gave me a taste to pursue content that really let me experience and have the freedom to go after mostly whatever I could think of. Jump back to September/October, and that was the element that kept me coming back to check out Baldur's Gate. Luke Stevens and Mortismal Gaming, 2 channels I incredibly admire and adore, kept posting content covering the game, which I couldn't help but watch because, you know, I know they wouldn't just cover a game to that extent if there wasn't something more to it. I watched the reviews, Vextra Life as well, very helpful content on there for people starting the game, and I just didn't get it, because another mountain for me to climb was, and I'm sorry, I know this sounds so fucking stupid, I'm embarrassing myself saying this, it was the turn-based mechanics. And why is that? Why are turn-based games so divisive for a lot of gamers? Which is a great title for another video, but anyways, speaking for myself, there are a total of 3 turn-based games I've ever played in my life up to this point: South Park: The Stick of Truth, Yakuza Like a Dragon, and now Baldur's Gate 3. I know that's pathetic, please feel free to make fun of me in the comments, but I'm coming clean here, alright? Take it easy. But yeah, South Park was my first turn-based game that I really played and finished the completion. I know, what a world. And also, yes, I have to play any of the Persona games, but trust me, that'll change. That game looks so fucking cool. Oh my god. But turn-based games were something I had very little experience in. However, I really loved what I had played before. But it wasn't the combat mechanics that really gripped me, it was more like everything surrounding it kept encouraging me to continue further on. Yakuza Like a Dragon was the flagship title for me in that respect, and I had never played a Yakuza game before then. But I kept coming back because I wanted to get to the next cutscene. I was absolutely immersed in the story and its characters. The combat was something which I found to be entertaining, but I was still on the fence where I felt that if it was real time, I would have maybe had more fun in those sections, since I'd seen the combat in previous Yakuza games to be like a fun, arcadey, brawly beat-em-up. My impression was still that it was slow, clunky, trying to methodically plan out moves like 3 steps ahead just felt like work and killed the pacing for the game. In my head, it felt like I had it all figured out, like, yeah, this style just isn't for me, but I'm willing to give it a shot as long as the story is still really engaging. And then on December 7th, at the 2023 Game Awards, Baldur's Gate 3 is announced as the winner. And I was just absolutely flabbergasted, not because I felt that it didn't deserve it, I hadn't even played the game yet, but compared to everything else that went up against it, Spider-Man 2, Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, Alan Wake 2, Resident Evil 4 Remake, and Super Mario Wonder, it just did not strike me as something which would beat out those other games, which to my impression was just a style that was not that mainstream. Award shows to me mostly give out the sense that it's more or less a popularity contest rather than objectively judging what is the best title of content for that year, but that's just, you know, me being cynical. The Oscars and Golden Globes are a great example of that in my opinion. And do you remember like the backlash it got for that as well? There was this like divisive split between some fans on whether Spider-Man 2 deserved it more, a game which I have yet to play, so I have no horse in that race, but I had played the first one and I had a fun time. It wasn't something that stood out to me much, but I enjoyed it nonetheless. I got the platinum and then never looked back. But comparing that to, I mean, I haven't played Spider-Man 2, but I'm judging based from what I've seen from the gameplay footage. I know the story is very good, but comparing that to Baldur's Gate and what everything Baldur's Gate 3 has to offer, I mean, just look that up. Spider-Man 2 versus Baldur's Gate 3. There is no shortage of content on that. It is a pretty, I think it's pretty one-sided. But, you know, I have to play Spider-Man 2 to really, like, be honest and genuine about that, but, I mean, I think I'm pretty sure. So, anyways, every year for Christmas, since I've been living on my own, I always treat myself to one thing. Something that's a little pricey, but I take pretty good care of my finances throughout the year, so it's my one time of the year where I really get to splurge on something that I want or think I really need to treat myself to. Sometimes it's a game or a collector's edition of something, maybe a new air fryer or some extra fancy bed sheets that I've been eyeing at Home Goods, you know, whatever, I'm simple, shut up. And when it came to games, there were a couple choices that I had to choose from. Cyberpunk 2077, because I've heard a lot of great things that have been happening with the game, and the Phantom Liberty DLC was a huge success. God of War Ragnarok, and finally Baldur's Gate 3. Sorry, Spider-Man 2, you weren't in the running. I'll play you when you go on sale, I promise. I knew it would have been a safer bet to settle on Cyberpunk or God of War. Again, sci-fi guy here. Cyberpunk was right up my alley now that the game's been fixed, and I absolutely adored the first God of War and wanted to check out where the story had gone from there, but everything in my YouTube feed was talking about BG3, and I'd never even heard of Baldur's Gate 1 or 2. Like, was I supposed to play the first two to understand what's happening here? Was 1 and 2 really popular? Like, I feel like I keep up with the pulse on classic games, or at the very least are aware of them, and I've just been completely missing out on this dynamite franchise that's been around since the late 90s? Well, I learned that 1, you do not need to play the first two to understand what's happening here. This game, 3, does a great job of introducing the world to the players, and 2, yes, they were good games, 1 and 2, the originals, but nothing to the popularity that BG3 has received, but this definitely has put those games on the map now. I've been hankering for something different. I've played games like Cyberpunk before, just in terms of open world RPGs, and while I still really want to get a copy, something steered me in another direction. And God of War was a sequel. All these games were a sequel, really. Well, basically, I just wanted to try something that I wouldn't normally play, so I took a big risk and went ahead and purchased at full price Baldur's Gate 3, something which I don't normally do. I am typically someone who waits for at least a 20% sale or much more during the holiday season, or whenever I know there's going to be a big discount event going on. There wasn't anything that I'd seen on my own that made me think I have to play this game, nothing gameplay wise. It was really, in all honesty, kind of a peer pressure thing, but nobody I know personally is playing the game, so it wasn't really that. My thinking was more like, okay, am I really going to pass this game up because of my own insecurities, and am I willing to go out of my comfort zone to try something that might potentially be something that's very special? And thankfully, I listened to that voice instead of falling back to what I knew was safe and that I'd have a fun time enjoying nonetheless. I'm a bit of a gambling man myself, so the risk-reward aspect to this was something too big of a stake that I didn't want to let myself get in the way of. I wanted to give this game a chance. At best, this would be everything everybody had been hailing it to be, and at worst, I'd hate it, and then I could make a nice little controversial YouTube video making my stance as to why the game just didn't work for me. But after playing it, not even halfway through the game, I couldn't make the ladder for a video even if I tried. Maybe like as a joke post, but I gotta make this video first. This was everything that I heard it to be, and some. So now I'm gonna dive in as to what my experience was like for the first few hours of the game, because it was rough as hell. I did not love this on the first go. This took quite a bit of effort on my part. I wanted to immediately love this as soon as the game booted up, but my god, there's just a lot to get a handle on here. I thought the FromSoft games were an uphill climb, but BG3 was like my Mount Everest. And that was twice the case because I had never even played D&D. I had no idea what 5th edition was, I had no clue that was even a thing, and what's worse is I didn't even know that this wasn't really traditionally turn-based. I understood a little bit, about advantage and surprise. There's a little of that in Like a Dragon, but usually it's whoever's team initiated a conflict that goes first and then goes from there. Not really the case in BG3. Lots of things are rolled behind the scenes, which helps, but I didn't really understand what any of that meant for a while. Actions, bonus actions, and spell slot allocation was also new for me. I watched a hell of a lot of beginner tips and guides before starting, but even then, I'm someone who has to learn through a bit of trial and error and then actually practicing hands-on, but damn did it take a while to have everything sink in. I am not exactly the sharpest crayon on the box. So I booted up the game and you're introduced to the breathtaking cinematic CG cutscene. Like, it's near Blizzard quality, very, very impressive. And the story, again, I'm shocked that it was as easy to grasp a hold of than I initially was thinking. For some reason, maybe I'm not the only one, but fantasy stories in general are harder for me to get into. Part of it is just because traditionally they have very expansive backstories to everything, and the whole ordeal can feel kind of overwhelming. But BG3 starts off with a pretty straightforward objective, the central thread carrying you through the journey. You're kidnapped and placed in this alien ship. You implant a little worm that kind of reminds me of the translator in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, that in due time is supposed to eventually turn you inside out and to become another member of the hive mind, the Mind Flayers. And that's pretty much all you get starting off, but slowly and surely you get directed as to where you need to go, with pieces of the main objective, along with the world building to flesh out this playing field. That's all I want to say about the story, so for my last bit here, I did kind of want to give you guys some tips of my own. Nothing extensive, this will probably seem really rudimentary if you're already well into the game, but for anyone who's just starting, and you haven't had any experience with D&D or anything like that, then sort of for you guys, I still haven't played D&D, so more like just game tips. A few pointers I wish I kind of had drilled in my head beforehand so I wasn't so dependent on quick loads. Number one, understand that this is a game of consequence. Your responses do matter, both in the small and grand scheme of the plot. Once this sucks you in, it's going to become very stressful at times deciding the best thing to do will be. A big struggle I've been having with the more I play is letting myself stick with what I decided with, or worse, when a dice roll doesn't go in my favor. Ultimately, you can play the game however you want, but one thing I would encourage you to do is just let the rolls play things out majority of the time.
You roll your dice, you move your mice. Nobody gets hurt.
There's a system in place called Karmic Dice that kind of aids the player from getting a bad streak of dice rolls back to back. I think leaving that off for a first playthrough is advisable. It not only works for dialogue checks, but for enemy rolls during combat encounters as well. It makes the game more difficult, but for a new player, the balanced difficulty is enough of a challenge in addition to trying to learn the system and how everything functions. Unless you're trying to go for a specific trophy with a dialogue thread or something like that, I think you're kind of doing yourself a disservice if you keep quick loading to pass every persuasion check or get the best combat spread you can every single time. Just personally, I feel like I'm stealing away the novelty of just how important of a role you have in the world. Nothing wrong with linear games, of course. Most of my favorite games are linear, but damn is it refreshing to have that edge where you can drastically alter people's lives, both personally and in a literal sense. There are many, many endings to this game. I don't know how true the 17,000 ending statement is, but suffice it to say, there's more than plenty. Number two, this is kind of a two-parter just because one is just more of a suggestion that doesn't really need to take up a whole slot. But part one, make sure your spell slots are balanced, and not everything should solely be based on damage dealing. That's something that I didn't really take as much advantage of, and so for my Bard, Cleric, and Wizard, they were just decked out with the best damage numbers that seemed to work best. Wrong. Don't do that. Buffing is super important in this game, something which, because of my experience with more simpler turn-based mechanics, every fight felt like I was just running uphill. You can do almost anything in this game, but I wouldn't advise you just to run in head first buffers into every encounter by trying to constantly dish out damage with every member of your party. Let everyone take roles. Think of it like a well-balanced team playing Overwatch or Dota or League or something. Let someone be the tank dealing DPS, your supports and buffers, and maybe someone specializing in stealth, because that's also extremely important in this game. And just go for as much balance as you can. It'll save you hairs, I promise you. Not everyone needs to be a melee build. Try to have room for your team to be adaptable. And with spell slots, really pay attention to make sure you don't have too many spells of a spell type. Example being, like for my cleric Shadowheart, she's got 4 level 1 slots, 3 level 2s, and 3 level 3s, at this point for level 6. So don't deck out your spells with only level 1s or 3s, because you're not going to be able to use them all, or worse, you won't have enough slots to cast the spell before having to long rest. Seems very rudimentary, but again, that's just something I didn't really understand starting the game up. And then part 2, which I mean, if you can't, then you can't. Like, I don't have a PC, but if you're deciding which system to use, I honestly feel like this works best if you have a PC to play this on. Especially because of the annoyance of specifically picking up items in this world. It's very aggravating on the console. You can highlight something and that'll be what you pick up, but you have to stand in the pixel perfect spot every time to do it. Even if you try pressing left and right on the D-pad, if you're out of range, then you can't do it. I bet every dollar that I had that it's much easier by simply pointing and clicking with a mouse or something like that. Number 3, a bit of an odd one, but if it's something you're interested in doing in the game, then you should probably take note, because you know, romancing is a big thing in this game. A lot of people talk about it. Romancing NPCs is much more nuanced here than in something like Mass Effect. This goes into what I was talking about before, where literally every dialogue choice mostly matters. And if you're planning on playing this in a specific style, be it good, bad, something in between, or just whatever chaos your specific class dialogue option is saying, it's going to impact your ability to romance specific members of your party. Ultimately, I'm encouraging you to play the way that you want, fuck everyone else and what they think of you, but if you do want to start a thing with, say, Astarion, like I initially wanted to, then understand you're going to have to say or do some things that may or may not be to your liking. So instead, if you really want to go for that, then decide on what method you like to approach your playthrough with and see which party member best aligns with that decision. Because if you're a good boy and do your best to help everyone you come across and be very honest and truthful, then you're very likely not going to hook up with someone like, again, Astarion anytime soon. In that example, someone like Karlach, Gale, or Shadowheart may be a better choice. And another note to that, which I did not know about going in, there are points where if you don't successfully romance that character by a certain stage in the game, then you won't be able to from then on. Most of the time, you need to be at a good standing with that person at the very least in order for that to carry through. Number 4, take advantage of the chest in your camp. Once you've unlocked the camp, not very far into Act 1, utilize the unlimited storage to keep yourself from throwing away or selling something that might be useful later on. You and your party only have so much inventory space available while you're traveling, and if you come across a really interesting weapon with stats that you might be able to work into one of your builds, keep it in your or keep it in your camp to test it out later, because there's no limit to the amount of items you can keep in the chest. It's extremely useful, especially for supplying items that let you do a complete long rest every night. In addition to that, don't consume anything that says spoiled or rotten on it. It will make you and your party sick, which usually amounts to a -1 on every roll your character makes, which is just an annoying drawback. So just check the quality of your foods during your long rest, and that applies to real life. Don't drink that spoiled milk. Don't do it. And not good for you. I don't care how cheap it is. Don't do it. Alright, I'm gonna stop there. Those were extremely basic tips, but it's just to get you started. And honestly, the best tip that wasn't even in the list that I'd give would be to simply let yourself make mistakes. It's okay to fuck up. It's going to happen. That's part of the experience. That's the fun of it. Depending on your patience, without having experience in D&D mechanics, some of the wording is going to be a bit of a learning curve to get used to, but if you take the time to suffer a bit in the early game, make it over that hill and you'll become another member of the growing horde that's absolutely obsessed with this game. It's a thrilling ride and well worth the struggle. The challenge is extremely rewarding, and don't be afraid to follow a build guide for a specific class. I think it's a great way to get a feel for how the build synergizes, and of course you're more than welcome to tweak and respec to whatever you'd like to try to better service your team. Once this game has you in its clutches, you'll never want to let go, so enjoy. Thank you folks for watching. It's always appreciated, and for those of you who've put in triple the amount of time that I have, I'd love to hear some additional tips down in the comments. Please, like, I'm asking for tips, like any tips, it doesn't matter, like for any class, I don't care. I'll definitely be playing this game multiple times, so even on classes that I wouldn't normally pick, like Druid, the really weird ones that I would like to try, are Druid. I don't usually do a Wizard or Sorcery class in most games. I prefer like a melee, but I did do Bard this time, which I have been having a lot of fun with. But so next time I'd like to try maybe a Druid or a Monk. Monk seems very interesting, something like that. I don't know, just like I would just like to try some of the weirdest classes and just kind of go again more out of my comfort zone. There are plenty of fans out there willing to help you on your journey, and it'll save you a ton of stress if you're willing to accept the advice. Take care.